It's considered a noble thing to do, sacrifice the comforts of home to lend a hand in a developing country. But for many well-intentioned volunteers, the reality doesn't live up to the romantic notion that we all have the power to change the world. As WGBH arts editor Jared Bowen shows us, this is the journey explored in the new musical at the American Repertory Theater.
In the spotlight is where Griffin Matthews finds himself nightly now, starring in the new musical Witness Uganda. He plays an aid volunteer, teaching a group of mostly orphaned students in the African nation, about as far away as one can get from his East Coast upbringing.
The easy part is going there and sort of, getting the books to the kids, but it's when there's an emergency that you find out what your organization's made of or what you yourself are made of.
That's been a question facing Matthews for the last 9 years, ever since he first arrived in Uganda. The show is his story, and the character on stage is largely him. He has been an eyewitness to Uganda, especially to its children. Early on in his aid mission, he had a chance meeting with a group of Ugandan teenagers on a road. They, he says, changed his life.
They told me that they were orphans and that they, didn't have enough money to pay for school, and so I spent the afternoon with them and asked them how I could help, and they said that they wanted to go to school. And of course I didn't have any money to pay for that, so I agreed to teach them in a library in the village, and we started holding daily classes. And the first day they showed up, but then that day turned into the next day, it turned into the next day, and I spent 6 weeks with them. Most of them had lost their parents to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And so they were fending for themselves, living in shacks.
Once back in the United States, Matthews worked with his eventual partner in life and art, Matt Gould. They devised a series of musically themed Uganda benefits to help aid the students, until the economy tanked.
Griffin was in a panic about how are we going to keep the organization afloat, what are we going to do? And I suggested, well, why don't we write a musical about it, and we'll get our friends together, and we'll do that.
Which sounds so ludicrous.
It was the worst idea I'd ever heard. I was like, who does that?
But I thought this could be interesting.
Someone in Uganda once told me, God's not going to show you the whole story of your life, because if he showed you, you wouldn't be able to handle it.
This was a musical unlike any other musical I had ever encountered. The music felt different to me. The storytelling was different.
Diane Paulus is Witness Uganda's director, her first project since winning a Tony for her direction of Pippin last year.
For me, it's always about, have we asked a big enough question? And the work will be as big and deep as the question is that you're asking. And I find in Witness Uganda, this is a huge question. We want to make change. How do we make change? How do we reconcile all the complications and challenges and mistakes that we as Americans make despite our noble efforts? And how do we continue to understand that change can be made and not be discouraged to the point of giving up?
Something Matthews and Gould didn't do either in Uganda or in crafting their musical. Today, they remain in constant contact with their students, or their kids as they call them, often Skyping them daily, giving an immediacy and an art to witnessing Uganda.
So, Emily, one of the things I really loved about this production is it tells this story, but it's not cliched, which I feared it might be going into this. You have this young, idealistic man who goes over to Uganda to save the world, and how many youth do you know where that's their modus operandi when they leave college? They've got to find fulfillment in themselves, so it becomes this narcissistic journey. But this show actually addresses that, so it's not a cliche. It's about as much about the American experience of helping a developing nation being all about ego as it is just helping and being there.
How much of it is fact based and how much it is kind of like artistic license?
It's largely based on his story, on Griffin Matthews' story. They have taken, obviously, some dramatic license because they are trying to create a musical here, but this is based on his own life story about going to Uganda and everything they encountered, from corruption to meeting these kids to sort of going out of the program that he was supposed to be participating in to actually teaching these kids. I mean, also, he told me the reason that he went to Uganda was because he was dealing with his own identity issues. He's gay. He was sort of cast off from his church, and so he told me about that as well.
I think that was kind of devastating for me, and also I think just being an African American growing up in America, we have a very specific identity in this country, and so when you travel abroad, you get a whole new identity because the world doesn't necessarily see you as an African American; they just see you as an American.
Isn't that a dramatic step to go to Africa as a gay man? I mean, that's not exactly embraced there.
It's actually a very dramatic step. I mean, just this week, most recently, there's been legislation that's being propelled forward starting in December, anti-gay legislation that would imprison someone for
Zimbabwe.
life for being for being gay in Uganda. That's on top of all the other injustice that's been perpetrated. And this is also dealt with in the show, and very harshly. You see how there is sort of an ignorance, as he says. There's an identity issue there. They just look at him, as an individual, but you can tell that it's sort of simmering what would happen if they were to learn that he's a gay man there.
Wow. So this is a big difference for Diane Paulus from Pippin and Porgy and Bess. I mean, she's not afraid to take on controversy, but
no, this is something you see her visual vocabulary expand here. She has done a fantastic job in presenting this show, and this is part of what she wants to do with the ART. She's not going to just take classic pieces like Pippin or Porgy and Bess, but she wants to push theater in new areas. It's not often either you're going to find a musical about Uganda, but she's done it, and she's done it well here.
All right, Jared, looks good.